My question for you, Ms. Zakharova, is right now there has just been a resolution, and this maybe can go into correcting the record of Russia's foreign policy and Russia's role in the world. There's a resolution in the UN Security Council on Gaza 2803, and people in the United States are expressing frustration, those who watch my program, for example, about the resolution itself, and are curious about Russia's position, the abstention, along with China. Talk about, if you can answer some of those frustrations about this resolution, about it going through, Russia's position with abstaining, and how it reflects and is consistent with Russia's foreign policy.
This is a very challenging question. I'd like to open this resolution so that I could quote some provisions of the resolution. I'd like to know that we gave a detailed answer, and it was Mr. Nebenze, our permanent representative with the United Nations, and there was a detailed response provided and commentary provided by the Ministry of Defense. I can tell you that indeed this was an American draft. We abstained, we did not vote for it, and what underlies that draft document that was prepared by Washington, there was this idea of the so-called Peace Council led by Trump, with participation of a number of respected global leaders, and that council in its term will be authorized to coordinate with Israel and Egypt to create international stabilization forces that will be entrusted to perform coercive functions, to demilitarize the enclave, to disarm Hamas and to disarm other units. And at the same time, please note that the participation of Palestinian National Administration to manage the sector and to determine the future fate of Palestinians per se, on the basis of, it is very important to note, on the basis of a two-government model is not considered. What can we do about that? How can we go away from this fact? How can we wave it away? And like you are also looking at the text. Israel obligations are not recorded, including no annexation of Palestinian lands, withdrawal of its troops. Nothing of the kind is mentioned in the document. There is another very important point. The United Nations Security Council and the Secretariat of the United Nations, judging by the document, are left out of this equation in terms of control and reporting or responding to practical issues related to the deployment of an international contingent. Why do we have to engage the United Nations, the Security Council and the Secretariat if they're not going to control or inspect or take part in the discussion of these matters? And there was another provision that sounded like an ultimatum associated with the promotion of the US-made draft. Though everyone was ready to discuss, but there was no normal fundamental discussion of the document, and principal comments provided by other member states were not considered. What kind of comments are we talking about? They were based on international law. They were made with reference to quotes to the resolutions of the Security Council and the General Assembly. There were references to the documents that were adopted by the international community in the legal field. If we look at this text again, there was no consideration made not consideration, but I should say that there was a moral and psychological pressure. I can describe it this way. When there was this motto that unless you adopt this document, it means that you are in favor of bloodshed. Our country was one of the countries that approached the Security Council and started working to make declarations to stop the bloodshed. So we cannot blame of being in favor of it. And I'd like to draw your attention that Russia has taken a very serious attitude to this effort. There was an alternative counter draft that was actually distributed to address the contradictions that emerged at the Security Council, and we insisted on going back to the internationally approved basis of with due regard to the interests of Palestine and Israel. We already acknowledged Palestine and recognized Palestine as a state. And to sum it up, the resolution 2803, it does not give the needed prerogatives to the Security Council, and it contradicts the spirit of proper peacemaking, and it is not fulfilling the function that it is declaring. It does not take into account international legal decisions that were made by the international community and the steps made by the international community. And the Palestine state, the creation of that state, was something that was signed up by the global majority. No one wants to heed that. The global majority is reinstating and reinforcing something that was agreed practically 80 years ago when there was a decision made to create two states. 80 years have passed, and the global majority is reiterating that there must be two states. One state was created a long time ago and has been recognized by the majority of states, and the second state has not been recognized by everyone, but they have to develop and they have the right to exist on the basis of international law. Somehow it is not taken into consideration. Why did we abstain?
Don't open it on your laptop. I just remember you're not going to have your microphone.
When the vote was taken, we were relying and we were taken into account on our vision, but at the same time we were taken into account the position of the Palestine national autonomy, and actually we took that into account. And of course we were taken into account the position of stakeholder Arab Muslim countries who supported the US document. Yes, indeed, no one wants any bloodshed, and it could be provoked by someone or something. And given the summary of these factors, we made the appropriate decision. I'd like to highlight the following. The Russian representatives have been highlighting it at every level. The bloodshed could have been stopped a long time ago. It is a well-acknowledged fact. But what had to be done? Perhaps it could happen if Washington methodically, and I'd like to say that it was 6 times, I'm checking the data, but it was 6 times when Washington failed to exercise its veto right against draft resolutions that required to stop violence. 6 times they vetoed those resolutions. They exercised the veto right. What is important? The important thing is for the resolution solution, not to become some sort of a shield or some sort of a smoke curtain to hide uncontrolled activities in Palestine, on Palestine land, so that it is not a final judgment to divest Palestinians of their right to self-determination. And of course, we need to make sure, please hear me, that it should be in line with genuine interests of Israel's citizens. We keep hearing from many countries and politicians who claim that they're acting for the benefit and in the interests of Israel citizens, but those decisions were made in the interests of some people in Israel, not the whole nation.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question, Danny.
Judging by how those who examine me are nodding their heads, I feel that I have given an excellent answer to this question. Well, in fact, you know, I'd like to say the following. If there is a human measurement, human aspect here, the things that human dimension. When I looked at what was done to Palestinians, this is something that is not that one cannot describe. A normal human being cannot say that this was an adequate thing to do. I don't know what the final death toll in Gaza. I don't know how many people are dead. 100,000. It was above 80, north of 80,000 or 90,000, practically 100,000 civilians, people who never took any arms in their hands. They were killed consciously, intentionally. I don't know whether it's easier to kill people by torturing them or not torturing them, but what was evident, their torture, their sufferings were long-lasted, and there were certain forces who were deriving pleasure watching Palestinian citizens suffer. You know, this is some of a waterline demarcation, line of demarcation. When I saw and heard how people were showing videos of not only wounded Palestinians, but Palestinians torn into parts, and were laughing and were saying, well, that's normal and it serves them well. You know, this is the end. It is similar to the United Kingdom. It is something in their genetic program, some sort of a breakdown. It is like pedophilia. You know, I think that such things cannot be eradicated, but they have to be treated medically. And an answer to the question if someone is a normal human being or not reads as follows: if in order to feel for a wounded child, you need to know what his or her nationality is. You need to feel that pain automatically. If you are not someone who is not sick, if you are well educated, if you are a human being who refers to civilization as a concept, you have to feel for those people automatically. You have to feel for the child who is in this dire situation without checking what the religion of the child, what the ethnic group, which ethnic group he or she belongs to, who his parents are, which language the child speaks. That is the end, full stop. Once you need to clarify who is that child, what is his ethnic identity, is the child from this or that side, well, that's it. It means that we're not dealing with normal people. Maybe there will be other civilizations, or there were other civilizations civilizations, but in our civilization, the civilization we live in, it is a sign of absolute perversion, and it is the sign of a beast, if I may. I could not but make this clarification, because this story, this situation does not only have this dry legal aspect. You know, this situation has an aspect that relates to the fact that it's been 2 years when we were observing how people were dehumanized, when people were pointing fingers at a TV screen and they were enjoying videos of a pregnant woman dying in labor, and they could not see their newborns because, you know, because of what?
Right now, the mainstream media is saying in the United States that Russia is invading NATO airspace with drones, seeking expansion in Europe, and committing acts of sabotage against NATO countries like Poland. Perhaps you can give an American audience an idea of the actual role that Russia plays in the world and what interests guide it.
Yes, of course. I suggest that your audience should think about one thing. Sabotage. Is sabotage good or bad? If it is good, then it should not be any reason to worry. If it is bad, then they should ask their governments and their regimes why they've been sponsoring sabotage against our country. Once they decide whether it is good or bad, we'll be able to continue the discussion. We believe that it is bad. We believe that extremist activities, terrorist acts are inadmissible. And having gained experience in North Caucasus, we believe that international terrorism is absolute evil, and everyone has to fight against it. We believe it, and we demonstrate it by example. I believe that your audience is quite young. Your audience may be diverse, but your audience are likely to be 30, 35, or under 40, and they don't know what the Russian Northern Caucasus international terrorism problem was. I can remind you that there was a time when the UK and a number of European states were sponsoring insurgents like Dudaev, Basayev. They were terrorists like Zakharov. Zakharov still lives in the United Kingdom, and he is the best guest for the British establishment. And they were committing terrorist acts and sabotage acts. Do you know what kind of terrorist acts they committed? For example, you take a large apartment house which is 15 stories high or 10 stories high, and terrorists, insurgents who were sponsored by the West, they brought explosives, hexagen, and they blew up those houses, and dozens and hundreds of people died. And there was another act of sabotage, and when in Budenovsk, it is a Russian city in the same region in the Caucasus, terrorists sponsored by the West, similar to how they sponsor Zelensky. There was a hospital, a maternity hospital was taken hostage. What is a childbirth? It is a miracle. It is a complicated process that requires everything: supply of oxygen, supply of water, electricity and light and heating for the baby to be born healthy. Those terrorists took that maternity hospital hostage. Those terrorists had West-made weapons bought and provided bought from the West and provided by the West, and they began dictating their will to the government. Nobody in the West, whether in Down Street, in Brussels or Washington, has made a statement that act was actually inadmissible. Everyone was was demanding that Russia made concessions to terrorists. This was the time when the West had to decide whether sabotage or terrorist acts were good or bad. You just need to decide once and for good. If your countries and the citizens of your countries choose leadership who sign off treaties on counter-terrorism, then they have to comply. By the way, the words international terrorism are no longer used in the international information space. No one is discussing international terrorism. In the year of 2010, there was no other topic. Everyone was discussing international terrorism. We kept hearing about international terrorists. But now this topic is no longer on the radar screen. I don't know what those international United Nations officials are doing. I have not heard this word mentioned by US observers, but this topic is still relevant. Why is it blocked by Western mass media? Because they feel uncomfortable given that Zelensky is an international terrorist who is targeting civilian infrastructure. The definition of terrorism, though there is not a universally accepted definition, but all definitions of international terrorism say that these are violent acts against civilians and to intimidate them. And we have just, we were discussing those strikes against the Russian energy system. It is civilian infrastructure. How about Nord Streams? It was civilian infrastructure that was destroyed by Ukrainians. Did anyone say anything? I have not heard anything from Brussels, Washington, Ottawa, Washington, or any other states. Did anyone say that it was bad to blow up a pipeline, a gas pipeline? How many times were power grids mined by people in the name and on behalf of the Kiev regime? How many times were terrorist strikes against the Crimea bridge? Was it was there anyone who tried to rebuke Zelensky? I will not shake your hand if you keep doing it. Did someone eat Berlin, Norway, Sweden, I don't know, Finland? Did anyone summon diplomats when it was declared by the Western countries that they suspect Ukrainians of that sabotage act? And I'd like to remind you how Russian diplomats were sent back home, though they were not accused of any particular crime. You need to define the standard, or you have to admit that there are no standards. Why should you ask these questions when no one can give an answer to the question, what is your attitude to acts of sabotage? First of all, you need to give a definition. Our definition is that international terrorism is absolute evil. Sabotage is evil. You need to also define it on your part. And by the way, it is a message to the civil society. The civil society has to demand a response to this question. What are we sponsoring? What is our money spent on? If you are targeting oil pumps, if you are targeting gas stations, then we should think about it. We need to decide whether it's good or bad. If this money is spent to strike the Crimean bridge, you need to decide whether it's good or bad. If civilian infrastructure is targeted, you need to decide whether it's good or bad. But this is the essence of the post-truth world. I have to apologize that we're going to finish our discussion like this on this note, but in 1945 nuclear weapons were used for the first time, and it was the United States government against militarist Japan. There were atomic bombs used against two cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and there was no reason to do that because the Second World War was about to come to an end, and it was clear that it was absolutely obvious, but it was some kind of retribution for Pearl Harbor and for all the sufferings of American people inflicted by Japanese militarists. And it was a horrific act, a terrible act. We are ashamed. You know, as we sometimes say, they did it, but we are ashamed. What is happening? All that is erased from the minds of Americans and people in the world. First of all, they started erasing the idea that it was a retribution for Pearl Harbor. Then they erased the fact that it was a decision made by the U.S. government. The U.S. government has never apologized. They did not even say we are sorry. They did not express any compassion. What do we see? Events held in Japan. At those events, Japanese government said that those nuclear bombs were falling from the skies. It looks like aliens were actually bombing them, or they were just fell from the sky. And you know what double standards lead to. And the most horrible, terrible, and barbaric thing is that at those ceremonies, Japanese government officials draw parallels with referring to Russia. They fail to mention that it was an act committed by the United States government, but due to some unknown fact, they are saying that Russia should not threaten the world with nuclear weapons. Russia has never used nuclear weapons and is a good faith party to all international documents. This has a direct relation to your question. There should be no double standards. You should not erase the memory of history, and you have to define basic concepts. Once we define that a table is a table, that a chair is a chair, a microphone is a microphone, a TV set is a TV set, internet is internet, then we can reach an agreement. But if we manipulate standards, and now we are manipulating concepts, concepts are being manipulated, not by us. I understand what it will lead to. When Hitler was called the father of European democracy, almost the father of European democracy, it led to the Second World War, to genocide, to Holocaust, etc. I also have a question. May I go?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, yesterday's international terrorist is today's honored guest at the White House.
As long as our colleagues are here with us, we'll say goodbye to Maria. It is an important statement. Let me say, in this country, I briefly mentioned it today, when we were fighting against international terrorism in the North Caucasus, on the one hand, we are fighters against terrorism, and at the same time we said that those who voluntarily reject any using arms, and if they acknowledged the laws of our state, if they comply with human norms and everything that was a part of our policy, we could have a dialogue with them. And this is what happened. And we are not ashamed of that. Ahmad Kadyrov is someone who was fighting on the other side, but he was strong enough to lead a large number of people to stop that bloodshed that was imposed on us, and to actually release our country from international terrorism. And his son is continuing this noble cause. And we sincerely believe that Ahmad Kadyrov is a hero of our country. Though we know what we began with, we know him as a hero. We esteem him as a hero, and will treat him this way all the time. And in this connection, I'd like to clarify it. It is crucial, and I believe that it was a great achievement of our President Vladimir Putin and of our people who managed to find a way out from this situation, and it was a very noble way out, most noble. And I always give this example as an effective recipe for those who face terrorist challenges domestically. Those terrorists may have foreign roots or international roots or domestic roots. This was an example that Russia demonstrated to the whole world, and this is something that has to be part of the world history book.